Hi, good afternoon, Jim from Avstar. What would you do if I told you human continuity is at the most riskiest it has ever been in the entire history of human beings right now? What would you say to that? But what if what I'm saying is 100% accurate and true? You're going to want some answers, I know. If you're going to believe that the entire human continuity is at risk and survival of the human race moving into the future, you're going to want some hard facts. And I think this is the first time I've brought these two charts together, and we're going to go into them in a little bit. But what I'm saying to you guys is just do a little bit of research on what I'm about to show you in this video, because the outcome of that research might shock you. I think a good point to start in just exploring a little bit, just to get an appetizer as to what I'm talking about, is look up the Milankovitch cycle. If nothing else, just look it up. And what I want you to pay attention in the Milankovitch cycle is how long we spend in a glacial period and how long of that Milankovitch cycle we spend in an interglacial. Don't just take my word for it that we spend 15,000 years in an interglacial, which is where the warm is experienced far northern hemisphere and southern hemispheres of this planet, and then during the interglacial we experience more ice moving towards the tropical regions of our planet. And I want you to think about what that would do to the arable growing lands that we have on this planet, regardless of what country. What would happen if that ground was ice, and not just a bit of ice? What about if there was meters of ice and actual glaciers on that land that's used at the moment in some of the more northern hemispheres that we use for agricultural growing right now? Do you realise that it's very difficult for one country to produce all of its needed crops, because some climates don't favour, say, the growing of oranges and lemons and limes and those particular fruits. What are they called? Citruses. So we know that. That's common sense. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out that. But what I'm telling you now is the government are so far out of touch with the reality of what's taking place on our planet that they are leading people literally to their death. And just because people aren't dying by the millions right now, it doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. Because, when you overlook something like this cycle, you're making a very, very, very grave mistake. Probably one of the biggest mistakes in human history. I kid you not. I don't know what these scientists that work in these organisations are doing literally with their time and the funding that they've got. But all I can say is it's shameful. They should resign immediately. They should never go back to science ever again, because if they are not talking about this cycle, and if they are not talking about the magnetic pole migration that's taking place right now, then they are doing an injustice to humanity. So, like I said, we've got two charts here, and I really want you to understand what information is in these charts, because then you have the ability to know what's coming next, and we're not too far away from it. We could be very close, in fact, very, very close to a human catastrophe. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm trying to show people what these dingbats that are so-called proclaimed scientists working in these government organisations and these mainstream organisations are failing to relay to the everyday Joe. That's you, and that's you, and that's you out there. So we're going to start with the right hand chart. We can see that there are peaks and troughs in blue and peaks and troughs in red, and each peak to peak in blue or red, whichever you want to look at, is an indication of 100,000 year cycle. Now if you notice on the temperature scale, which is the red one, that there are peaks, very sharp points, that represents 15,000 years. And then the squiggly line after that peak, there's 4 of them there, so this is a representation of 400,000 years, or 4 cycles, 4 Milankovitch cycles. And then the squiggly line after the peak is the interglacial period, which lasts around 85,000 years. So where are we on this chart, and how can we know for certain where we are on this chart and what to expect next? Because we can see it's a cycle of 100,000 years. We can also see that we go into interglacials, warm periods for 15,000 years. We can also see that we go into cold periods that last 85,000 years, which is a glacial period. But how do we know where we are? Well, this is where the left-hand chart comes into play. This is a chart of 15,000 years. If we look at the far left of that chart, at the green line, we can see that the temperature is a lot lower than, let's say, the Eleusinian warm period, the Roman warm period, and the medieval warm period. But what actually are we looking at that of these warm periods? We're looking at the interglacial period. Now, on the far right hand side of that left hand chart, take a look at the date. It goes up to 2000, the year 2000. And what do you see the green line doing at the end of that chart? It's getting closer to that cut-off point. Now we know that we came out of the Younger Dryas cooling period, which was the end of the last glacial period, around 15,000 years ago. The planet started to warm up. The glaciers have melted. They're still, in some regions of the planet, melting, but don't worry about the melting glaciers, because it's just a short-term natural process. This has happened many times before, and it's going to happen many times after this point in time. So we know where we are on the Milankovitch cycle on the right hand side, don't we? And we don't need to be a rocket scientist again to work out how much of this time is left and where the peak on the temperature chart on the red line goes next. In fact, if we was to put a crayon in a baby's hand, a couple of years old, in kindergarten, and tell him to copy the pattern of the peaks and troughs of the temperature going up and down, guess what? I bet you that kindergarten child would draw the red line going down. Now, tell me, what is going through the minds of the modern day climatologists, the modern day climate scientists, the government advisors on science, and the mainstream organisations like NASA and NOAA? Why are they not screaming about this? Because we all know what comes next. It's a glacial period. We all know that most of the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere of our planet will be covered in glacials. That's why it's called a glacial period. All those glacials that have been melting for the last 200-300 years at a rapid rate are going to rebound. It's just a matter of time. This in itself is enough to rock the boat of the global climate. So tell me, why are they not talking about it? Why is this not on the mainstream media and the news? Why are these organisations not talking about this very fact? I don't know. I don't know the answers to that, but I can tell you the answers to the climate. The reason why we're going through these dramatic climate changes, flash floods, breaking records, 300 years, 500 years floods, is because two things that are not being talked about in mainstream media, which directly affect climate more than CO2. That is the Milankovitch cycle, the interglacial periods and the glacial periods, and the time we spend in both of those periods, and the geomagnetic reversal which is taking place right now. Check for yourselves, if you don't believe what I have just showed you in this video, the facts. Are we at the end of the interglacial period? Yes or no? You shouldn't need to check it. The evidence is in front of you. But you want to go and do your own checking? Do it. Are we at the end of an interglacial, a warm period? So if we are, then we know we're going to come into a cold period next. 100% guaranteed we are going there. Yeah? There's a reason why the Vikings left Greenland. It was too cold. You couldn't grow crops in there. You know, they abandoned it as a lost project. There's a reason why Canada wasn't colonised. Well, or at least wasn't one of the first parts of the American continent to be colonised. There's a good reason for that. Because most people in these regions are going to discover, yet again, the full reasons for that. We are going back into a glacial period. But that in all, something else is much worse than that. We are doing that whilst going through a geomagnetic reversal on our planet. And those two things, either one of them would be enough to upset the climate, but having the two rolling together at the same time, you couldn't believe your luck, could you? Hitting two rare anomalies in one time period. It's absolutely shocking that these organisations are not taking this into consideration. And I know what people are going to say. They do. They just don't want to tell us. They don't want us all to panic. I don't think people understand human continuity. I really don't. If you want to secure the progressive years for humans in this world, then you need to do something about this right now. Because time's running out. We don't know too much about these things, because it was such a long time since the Earth went through and experienced, the returning back into a glacial period. We've got no recorded data of that other than what's in the ice core samples, other than what we know the temperatures were at them points in time based on those core samples. But we don't know fully what to expect. That's the same also for the geomagnetic reversal. And that's why the alarm bells should be ringing louder than ever right now, for just those two reasons. Because we simply don't know. And maybe those that have criticised the rate at which we collect data every 3 seconds here at the observatory, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, is because we want the highest resolution of data, so we miss nothing. That's why. That's why I've kept it going, even though the funding has tanked. You wouldn't believe it. The funding for this has tanked. You know what? More money was raised in a couple of months for Black Lives Matter, for this, that and the other, for the other and the other, and then the truckers protest, and yet nothing was raised for research in this field. Nothing was given or donated in any quantity, any workable, quantity. Can you believe that? People really don't care about the continuity of humanity enough to put their hand in the pocket. Even if the governments won't do it, they won't do it themselves, or very few. And by the way, I will give a shout out to Francis today. I really appreciate that, Francis. If everybody chipped in $20, we wouldn't be talking about this now. We would never have to mention that again, if people regularly supported what we're trying to do and achieve here on this channel, we would never have to talk about it. But that's life. So, I hope you understand these two charts now. All that remains is, do you believe it or don't you? How can you in one way deny it? Because the charts prove exactly what's coming next. You know what period we've been in on the left hand chart. You know what happens every 100,000 years and where we are right at this point in time. If there's anything you need to check, is whether or not the Milankovitch cycle is actually real or not. Some of you know the answers to that already, don't you? Guys, link down there in the description. As always, you take care of your loved ones. Bye for now.